Daniel was a strict and practical father who believed that life meant discipline, safety, and control. He loved his daughter Lina deeply, but his love came with rules, limits, and constant protection. Nothing could ever distract him from keeping her safe, especially strangers. One quiet evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual and stopped dead in his tracks. There, on the veranda, sat a homeless girl, barefoot, worn clothes, and a heart full of courage, teaching his young daughter Bible stories. Lina was listening intently, eyes shining with curiosity and hope. Daniel's blood ran cold. His heart pounded. What happened next, what he did after seeing them together, will shock you and leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more unbelievable stories you won't find anywhere else. Daniel believed order was the only thing standing between his family and chaos. Every morning began the same way. The alarm at exactly 5:30 a.m., the curtains pulled open to let in disciplined lines of sunlight, the coffee brewed strong and black, untouched by sugar or indulgence. His shoes were always aligned by the door, his shirts pressed the night before, his keys placed in the same shallow bowl without fail. To Daniel, routine was not habit, it was armor. The world in his eyes was unpredictable, unsafe, and full of people who smiled while hiding sharp intentions. He had learned that lesson early in life, through experiences he never spoke about in detail, only summarized with one sentence he repeated often: "You never know what people are capable of." That belief shaped everything he became, especially the kind of father he was. Daniel was not cruel, nor was he cold. He loved deeply, fiercely even, but his love was wrapped tightly in rules, warnings, and constant supervision. For him, protection did not mean trust. It meant control. And nowhere was that control more visible than in the way he raised his daughter, Lina. Lina was 8 years old, curious in the way children are before fear is fully taught to them. She asked questions Daniel found uncomfortable, about people, about why some slept on streets, about why strangers smiled at her in public places. Daniel answered every question with caution, sometimes with impatience, but always with the same underlying message: the world is dangerous. He chose her clothes carefully, walked her to the gate every morning, warned her not to linger after school, and reminded her constantly never to speak to anyone he did not personally approve of. To Lina, her father was strong and reliable, a man who always knew what to do. To Daniel, Lina was fragile, like glass, precious and one careless moment away from shattering. He did not see her curiosity as innocence. He saw it as vulnerability. In his mind, trust was a luxury children could not afford. Love, yes. Comfort, yes. But freedom? Freedom invited risk, and Daniel refused to gamble with his daughter's safety. What he did not realize was that his fear was slowly building invisible walls around Lina, walls she did not yet know how to question. Daniel's distrust of strangers was not irrational to him. It was earned. Years ago, he had watched good people suffer simply because they believed the best in others. He had seen kindness mistaken for weakness, generosity exploited, faith used as bait. To Daniel, belief without caution was foolishness. Even religion, which he respected from a distance, he approached practically. He believed morality mattered, but he trusted actions more than words, discipline more than promises. He had read parts of the Bible in his youth, enough to respect its teachings, but he believed faith belonged inside safe spaces. Churches, homes, quiet prayers, not on streets or in the hands of strangers. Teaching Lina, he emphasized logic over belief, preparation over hope. Always be alert, he would tell her. Always be careful. In his mind, that was love in its purest form. Yet beneath his certainty lived an unspoken fear, that no matter how hard he tried, the world might still reach his daughter. That fear kept him rigid, vigilant, and emotionally distant in moments when gentleness might have mattered more. On the evening, everything began to change. Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. The sky was still bright, the day unfinished, the kind of hour that disrupted routine, and Daniel disliked disruptions. As he parked the car and stepped out, briefcase in hand, his mind was still on deadlines and schedules. Then he heard Lina's voice, not laughing loudly, not calling for him, but listening. Quiet, focused. Daniel slowed his steps. From the gate, He could see the veranda clearly, and what he saw made his body tense instantly. Lina sat cross-legged on the floor, her back straight, her face intent. In front of her sat someone Daniel did not recognize, a young girl barefoot, clothes worn thin, hair tied back loosely, holding an open book in her hands. Daniel did not yet hear the words being spoken, but he did not need to. Every warning he had ever repeated to Lina rose sharply in his chest at once. Stranger, unsupervised, close. His heart began to pound, not with confusion, but with anger born from fear. He took a step forward, gripping the gate, unaware that in that single moment, before he spoke, before he acted, his carefully ordered world had already begun to crack. Daniel stood frozen for a fraction of a second, his hand still wrapped tightly around the iron gate, his briefcase hanging forgotten at his side. The scene in front of him did not make sense within the rules he had built his life around. Lina was not afraid. She was not crying. She was not pulling away. She was listening. The stranger sat opposite her on the veranda floor, not invading her space, not touching her, just speaking softly, as if each word had been carefully chosen. Daniel's eyes moved quickly, scanning for danger the way a soldier scans unfamiliar ground. Bare feet, torn hem, dust-stained skin. No bag except a thin cloth folded beside her. The book in the girl's hands was open, its pages worn, edges bent from use. Daniel's chest tightened. This was exactly the situation he had warned Lina about dozens of times. The scenario he had rehearsed in his mind but hoped would never happen. His heart told him to act fast. His fear told him to act harder. Without announcing himself, without clearing his throat or calling Lina's name, Daniel pushed the gate open with a sharp metallic creak that cut through the quiet like a blade. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice loud, clipped, and unyielding. Lina turned immediately, her face lighting up for a brief second when she saw him, then falling when she heard his tone. The girl flinched, not dramatically, not in panic, but enough for Daniel to notice. She closed the book slowly, as if sudden movement might make things worse. Daniel took 2 long strides forward, placing himself instinctively between Lina and the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before adding. "And why are you talking to my daughter?" His words were sharp, but underneath them was something raw and urgent, something closer to terror than anger. Lina opened her mouth to explain, but Daniel raised his hand without looking at her. This was not a conversation. Not to him. This was a threat that needed to be removed. The girl's lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if she were deciding whether speaking would help or harm. Finally, in a voice barely louder than the wind brushing past the house, she spoke. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her eyes lowered, her fingers still resting on the open pages. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just telling her a story." Daniel laughed once, short and humorless. "A story," he repeated. "You don't know my daughter. You don't know this family. You don't sit here and talk to children like it's nothing." The girl looked up then, not defiantly, not boldly, just honestly. "It was from the Bible," she said quietly. "I thought it might help her." The word help hit Daniel like an insult. Help implied need. Need implied failure. His jaw tightened. "She doesn't need anything from you," he snapped. "Especially not lessons from a stranger on my doorstep." Lina tugged gently at his sleeve. "Papa," she whispered. She was just, "Enough?" Daniel said, his voice dropping low, final. He turned back to the girl. "Leave. Now." For a moment, the girl didn't move. Not because she was resisting, but because she was steadying herself. Daniel noticed then that her hands were trembling, just slightly. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her dress, careful not to make eye contact too long. "I understand," she said. "I didn't mean any harm." There was no argument in her tone, no pleading, just acceptance. She picked up her thin cloth, folded the book against her chest, and took a step away from the veranda. Daniel felt a strange flicker of something then. Irritation, maybe, or discomfort, but he ignored it. Fear did not allow room for second thoughts. "And don't come back," he added, harsher than necessary, as if to reinforce the boundary he believed had already been crossed. The girl paused at the edge of the yard, turned slightly, and spoke one last time without looking at him. "Sir," she said, "sometimes people listen because they need hope, not because they're lost." Then she walked away, barefoot on the concrete, disappearing beyond the corner of a street. Daniel watched her go, his shoulders tense, his breath shallow, until she was gone completely. Only then did he look down at Lina. She was staring at the ground, her small hands clenched in her lap. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, immediately softening his voice as he knelt beside her. He pulled her into a tight embrace, pressing her head against his chest as if to physically block out the world. "Did she touch you? Did she scare you?" Lina shook her head slowly, her cheek resting against his shirt. "No, Papa," she said. "She was kind." Daniel frowned. Kindness was not a qualification he trusted. "Kind doesn't mean safe," he replied firmly. "You cannot talk to people you don't know. Ever." Lina nodded, but she did not look convinced. Daniel stood, guiding her inside, locking the door behind him with deliberate force. As he moved through the house, checking windows, pulling curtains, restoring order, he told himself he had done the right thing. He had acted quickly. He had protected his child. That was his duty. And yet, as the evening settled and the house grew quiet, an unfamiliar unease followed him from room to room, like a thought he couldn't quite catch. Dinner that night passed with fewer words than usual. Lina ate slowly, her appetite small, her eyes distant. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. He told himself children forgot quickly. Fear passed. Lessons stuck. After washing the dishes and preparing Lina for bed, he tucked her in with practiced care, smoothing the blanket, turning off the light, standing at the doorway longer than usual. "You know I only want to keep you safe," he said, softer now, almost unsure. Lina nodded again, but as he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Papa?" she asked. "Yes." "She said that when nobody stays with you, God still does." Daniel froze, his hand on the doorframe. He did not turn around. He did not respond immediately. The words settled somewhere deep, unsettling something he had sealed away long ago. "Go to sleep," he said finally. The door closed quietly behind him. But sleep did not come easily that night. Long after the house fell silent, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing a calm, trembling voice he could not forget, and wondering why, for the first time in years, certainty felt heavier than doubt. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay on his back, eyes fixed on the faint crack in the ceiling where the paint had chipped years ago, listening to the steady ticking of the wall clock he had once bought because it was reliable. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet he usually welcomed, but tonight it pressed on him. Lina's words replayed themselves without permission, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a calm persistence that refused to fade. "When nobody stays with you, God still does." Daniel shifted onto his side, then onto his other side, as if moving alone could shake the thought loose. He told himself it was nothing, a child repeating something she had heard, a line borrowed from a book. Yet the tone lingered with it, the softness of the stranger's voice, the lack of demand in her words. Daniel prided himself on certainty. He liked answers that closed doors, not questions that opened them. And yet here he was, wide awake, feeling as though something had slipped past his defenses without force. For the first time in years, he wondered if protection could sometimes look like rejection, and if rejection, no matter how justified, could leave a mark. Morning arrived without relief. Daniel went through his routine automatically, muscle memory guiding his hands while his mind lagged behind. Coffee tasted bitterer than usual. The news droned on, unheard. When Lina came into the kitchen, she greeted him politely, as she always did, but something was different. She spoke less. She moved slower. Her eyes didn't wander with curiosity the way they usually did. Instead, they lingered on nothing in particular, as if she were listening to a conversation that existed somewhere else. Daniel noticed this, and the awareness unsettled him more than he expected. He wanted to ask what she was thinking, wanted to explain himself more clearly, but explanation had never been his strength. He believed action spoke louder, and yesterday, his action had been firm, decisive. Necessary, he told himself. As he walked Lina to the gate, He repeated his usual warning about strangers, but the words felt rehearsed, hollow. Lina nodded, obedient as always, yet Daniel sensed that something fragile had shifted, not broken, but bent. And bends, he knew, could turn into breaks if ignored. Later that day, Daniel saw her again. He had not planned to. In fact, if asked, he would have said he wasn't thinking about her at all. But as he drove through the older part of town on his way back from an errand, his eyes caught a familiar shape near the edge of the street. A young girl sat on an overturned crate, legs folded beneath her, her back straight despite the uneven ground. The same thin cloth lay beside her. The same book rested open in her hands. Daniel slowed without realizing it. People passed by her without a glance. Some stepped wide around her. A pair of teenagers laughed as they went by, one of them muttering something Daniel couldn't hear but understood well enough. The girl didn't react. She didn't look up. She simply kept reading, occasionally pausing as if considering a sentence before continuing. Daniel parked the car across the street and watched. Minutes passed. She did not ask for money. She did not call out. She did not perform desperation. She simply existed, quietly, stubbornly, with a Bible open on her lap like an anchor. The realization unsettled him more than the night before. She was not trying to take anything from anyone. Daniel crossed the street slowly, telling himself he was only curious. That observation was not involvement. As he approached, the girl sensed him and looked up. Recognition flickered across her face. Not fear, not resentment, just acknowledgement. "Sir," she said softly, closing the book halfway, not as a defense, but out of courtesy. Daniel stopped a few steps away, keeping distance the way he always did. "You're here every day?" he asked, surprised by how neutral his voice sounded. She nodded. "Most days." He hesitated, then asked the question that had followed him since the night before. "Why didn't you go home?" The girl looked down at the book, then back at him. "My home ended when my mother died," she said simply. No drama. No pause for sympathy. After that, there wasn't anywhere to go. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest. "And school?" he asked. "Did you go to school?" She shook her head. "Not really. I learned letters outside of church. People would read aloud. I listened." She touched the page gently. This took longer. Daniel frowned. "Then why teach it?" The girl smiled, small and unguarded. "Because it kept me from breaking," she said. "And because children listen in a way adults don't." The answer landed quietly but firmly. Daniel realized then that she had not defended herself once. She had only explained. He stood there longer than he meant to, the street moving around them, time passing unnoticed. Finally, Daniel nodded once, more to himself than to her. "Be careful," he said, the words instinctive. She inclined her head. "I always am." He turned back toward his car, his steps heavier than before. All the way home, his mind replayed the scene, not the confrontation, but the stillness, the dignity, the absence of bitterness. He had always believed hardship hardened people, that survival demanded sharp edges. And yet, here was someone who had lost more than most and still spoke gently, still offered something without asking anything in return. That night, as Daniel sat alone in the quiet house after Lina had gone to bed, he understood something that unsettled him deeply. The danger he feared might not have been a girl at all. It might have been a way fear had taught him to close doors, even when something worth letting in was standing right outside. The realization followed Daniel into the next day and refused to leave. It sat with him at breakfast, lingered during meetings, and returned in the quiet moments when noise no longer distracted him. He found himself replaying the girl's words, not because they were dramatic, but because they were steady, spoken without hunger for approval or pity. For years, Daniel had believed that danger announced itself loudly, that threats arrived with chaos and warning signs. But what unsettled him now was the opposite. The possibility that fear could wear the mask of responsibility, that protection could become a barrier not just against harm, but against meaning. That evening, when Lina sat across from him doing her homework, he noticed how often her eyes drifted toward the window, how her pencil paused between answers. "You're distracted," he said gently. Lina hesitated, then looked up, Papa, she asked carefully, is it wrong to help people? The question struck deeper than any accusation could have. Daniel opened his mouth to answer instinctively, to explain safety, boundaries, logic, but the words did not come. He realized that the world he had built for Lina was secure, yes, but narrow, and something inside him, something he'd ignored for a long time, whispered that maybe strength was not proven by how tightly you held on, but by knowing when to loosen your grip. That night, Daniel made a decision that frightened him more than any stranger ever had. The next afternoon, he returned to the same corner of the city where he had seen the girl before. She was there again, seated in the same place, the book open, her posture calm despite the noise around her. When she noticed him, she stood immediately, uncertain this time, unsure what he'd come to say. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his hands visible, his tone measured. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. The girl blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I reacted out of fear," Daniel continued. "Fear for my daughter. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty." The girl listened without interruption, the same quiet attention she had shown Lina. "I want to help," Daniel said, then paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Not as charity, as respect." He explained his idea slowly, that Lina had asked questions, that she wanted to learn, that perhaps teaching did not have to come from polished classrooms to be meaningful. The girl's hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with disbelief. "I don't want to cause problems," she said. "You won't," Daniel replied. "I'll make sure of that." When he offered to walk her home, to his home, she hesitated longer this time. Trust, Daniel realized, was not built in a moment. It was earned. Finally, she nodded, not because she needed a roof, but because she sensed sincerity where there had once been hostility. When they arrived, Lina opened the door before Daniel could knock. Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with something brighter. Recognition, joy, relief. "You came back," Lina said softly, looking at the girl. Daniel knelt beside his daughter. "She's here to teach," he said, "and to learn." The house felt different that evening. Not chaotic, but alive in a way Daniel had not anticipated. There were rules, boundaries, structure. Daniel did not abandon who he was. But there was also something new. Openness. Over the following days, he arranged what he could. Clean clothes. Shoes that fit. A small room, modest but private. He enrolled the girl in school quietly, without announcement or praise. When neighbors questioned him, when colleagues raised eyebrows, Daniel did not argue. He simply continued. One evening, someone finally asked him directly if he wasn't afraid of bringing a homeless stranger so close to his family. Daniel looked at Lina, seated at the table, listening intently as the girl explained a passage from the Bible with patience and warmth. Then he answered calmly, "A person who carries light through darkness is not something to fear." And in that moment, Daniel understood that the world had not become safer. He had become braver. Daniel did not announce his choice to the world, but the world noticed anyway. Change is a way of doing that. It unsettles people who are comfortable with things staying the same. Neighbors began to whisper, first quietly, then openly. Some questioned his judgment, others his sanity. A few wrapped their concern in polite language, warning him about risks and bad influences, while meaning something far less generous. Daniel listened without arguing. He had spent most of his life believing that safety came from predictability, from avoiding uncertainty at all costs. Now, for the first time, he was learning that certainty could also become a cage. The girl settled into a rhythm that surprised everyone, including Daniel himself. She woke early, helped around the house without being asked, studied harder than anyone expected, and taught Lina not with authority, but with patience. There was no preaching, no pressure. Only stories, questions, and quiet conversations that lingered long after the lessons ended. Daniel watched from a distance, noticing the subtle changes in his daughter. Lina laughed more freely. She asked deeper questions. She listened with her whole body, not just her ears. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Daniel felt something loosen inside his chest. The house no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt like a place where something was growing. Time passed in the way it always does, quietly, relentlessly. The girl began school, struggling at first, then catching up with a determination that humbled even her teachers. Lina grew alongside her, not just in age, but in understanding. Daniel, too, was changing, though he would not have described it that way. He still believed in discipline. He still believed in preparation. But he no longer believed fear deserved the final word. One evening, after the girl had gone to her room and Lina had fallen asleep at the table with a book open in front of her, Daniel sat alone in the living room, the same room where certainty had once ruled unquestioned. His eyes fell on the worn pages of the Bible resting on the shelf, not displayed, not hidden, simply present. He picked it up for the first time in years and opened it without intention, landing on a passage he had heard before but never truly considered. This time, the words felt different, not because they had changed, but because he had. He understood now that faith was not the opposite of logic, and compassion was not the enemy of caution. Strength, he realized, was not about keeping danger at all costs. Sometimes, strength was about recognizing goodness when it appeared in unexpected places, and having the courage to let it stay. Years later, when Lina was grown, people often asked her where her confidence came from, where she learned to see people the way she did, without blindness, but without cruelty either. She would smile, the way people do when a memory is too important to summarize quickly, and she would tell them about a barefoot girl on a veranda, about quiet stories told without demand, about a father who believed the world was dangerous until he learned that fear could be unlearned. She would speak of the lesson that shaped everything that followed, not taught in a classroom, not written on a board, but lived out day by day. Daniel, older now, listened to these stories from the background, content to remain unnamed. He had never sought credit. He only knew this. The moment he chose trust over fear, his daughter learned something no rule could have taught her. That light does not always come from places that look safe, and that sometimes the people we push away are the very ones sent to remind us what hope looks like.